So Mesopotamia is right here, almost in the middle of our map. And you want to remember that it's surrounded by those seas. So that's an easy way to find it. Mediterranean Sea, Black Sea, Caspian Sea, Persian Gulf, and the Red Sea. All right, so let's take a look. Just as a quick refresher, because we've already done this on our map. If you have not created your map of Mesopotamia, please go back to last week's work and get that done. So we have here the Tigris River and the Euphrates River, Mesopotamia in this green Fertile Crescent area. All right, so this is where we start taking some notes. If you are working in the Google Slide Notes, you're just going to drag. When you find the right word on the side, you're going to click on that and drag it to the right place. If you are doing paper notes, then obviously you will write in and fill in the blanks where they are missing some words. All right, so. Okay. All right, so we know that the Fertile Crescent is an arc of land between the Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean Sea. So you got Persian Gulf here, stretching over to the Mediterranean Sea. And that is called the Fertile Crescent because it is really extra fertile area of land during ancient times. And this is the place where people first learned to farm, probably by noticing, accidentally dropping seeds on the ground. The ground was so fertile, stuff grew. So it is in Southwest Asia, which is the modern day Middle East, Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, that area of the world. All right, so let's talk about a little bit of a review of the geography stuff that we know. So Mesopotamia means the land between the rivers. Mesopotamia is actually a Greek word. The people that lived there during these times did not call it Mesopotamia. It was named that way when the Greeks started trying to make world maps, and they named it that because it meant in Greek land between the rivers. And we know that our two awesome rivers there are the Tigris, the one further east, and the Euphrates, which is the one further west. And what's especially important to know about those rivers that allowed farming to be discovered and kind of invented and started here was that both of those rivers flooded once a year. And they left when they flooded. Raise your hand if you've ever been swimming in a river. Anybody swimming in a river? Do you know when your feet touch the bottom of a river, what does it feel like? It's weird and squishy and like slimy and squelchy, right? That is silt, okay? So it's this kind of like water, mud, dirt mixture. It turns into like a really goopy, thick mud type stuff. That is silt. And so when the river floods, it kind of brings up all that silt onto the land. And then when the water goes back down, it leaves the silt. And the silt is full of all kinds of like nutrients that are really, really good for the soil and for growing. So that's what it says when it flooded. That's how it helped. Now, in the beginning, that was a problem because you have to, flooding can be dangerous. However, once they learned how to kind of predict when the river would flood and where it would flood to, they learned to be prepared for it in time, and they would dig these canals for the flood water to go into so it wouldn't kill people and damage their houses. So let's talk a little bit about religion. We haven't talked about this category yet for Mesopotamia. So Mesopotamia is where the world's first religions that we have evidence of are going to be. Because this is the first place where people were living in civilizations and villages. So Mesopotamians were mostly polytheistic. So as a review, we know that polytheism is the belief in one or more than one gods. Everybody, polytheism, one or more than one? More than one, right? So polytheism is the belief in many gods. The Mesopotamians believed in about 3,000 different gods and goddesses. And they were mostly based on nature. Goddess of fire, wind, saltwater, freshwater, like harvest, all that kind of stuff. The Mesopotamians very strongly believed that the gods could be angered at any moment. So it was their job to keep them happy. And they felt like if they angered the gods and they didn't keep them happy, they would cause, natural disasters, or the crops wouldn't grow, or things like that. So they thought it was their job to keep the gods happy. So the Sumerians, who were the first group of people who lived in Sumer in this area, they built impressive ziggurats. Everybody say ziggurat. So a ziggurat is this little picture here that's on the screen. It's a clip art picture, but it's a picture of a ziggurat. And it's sort of like a pyramid, except it's called a step pyramid because it has different levels that go in. And then you can see there's like these steep steps that go up it, and also these like doorways, because inside were offices and places that they used. So in Egypt, they built the pyramids to bury their pharaohs. So those are burial tombs. But in Mesopotamia, the ones that they built were actually like functioning buildings on the inside. And the top up here, the very top level was the temple to the god or goddess for that city state. And up there, they would make sacrifices, they would bring food, wine, animals, and they would leave those things to keep the god or goddess happy. All right, now also important in this area, and remember we're just doing a summary today, is that they were polytheistic. However, monotheism also began in Mesopotamia. So monotheism, we know, is the belief in one god or goddess, right? And the first ever monotheistic religion, which was Judaism, began in Mesopotamia also. And this is the symbol of Judaism, the Star of David. In Mesopotamia. And Islam also began in Mesopotamia. All the major monotheistic religions began in this part of the world, just after each other, not at the exact same time, but in the same general place. Are like 5,000 years old, and they're still standing. So they're trying to make sure that they don't, erode away and disappear. They're trying to preserve them because they are thousands and thousands of years old. All right, so let's talk about achievements next. There's going to be a huge amount of achievements. I could probably talk about Mesopotamian achievements for a month. We're not going to. But we're just going to talk about a couple of the major ones today, and then we're going to spend a couple of days on achievements just themselves. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is the Epic of Gilgamesh. Everybody say Gilgamesh. 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 All right. Gilgamesh. The Epic of Gilgamesh is basically a really, 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 really long poem. It's like as long as a book, and it tells a story. So it's this kind of collection of myths and legends from Mesopotamia. And it's important because it's one of the earliest pieces of literature in the world. So this is kind of the reason we have books to read and Google Slides to read. It's the kind of the first time people wrote down stories. They would have told it first, and then when they learned to write, some people wrote it down. And we'll talk a little bit more about what's in that when we get to our achievements lessons. So Epic of Gilgamesh is a really long poem. It is one of the earliest works of literature in the world. No, not necessarily. Yeah, they will have translated it into English.
Can you look it up on Google and read something?
I'm sure you can.
Not the actual.
Yeah, I think it would have been written in more than one place, though. I think. All right, so let's talk about a little bit more. Let's talk about science and technology, right? So some science and technology achievements from the Mesopotamians that really affect our life every day. The wheel. These are the people that invented the wheel. Like wheels on cars. Yeah. So they invented the wheel, the sail on boats, and the plow, which is a really, really important part to be able to grow food in bigger amounts. Helps you break up the ground in bigger spaces and faster so you can plant more seeds. They were also the first to use bronze, which is going to be really important because before this, everyone was making their tools out of stone and rock. And these guys mixed tin and copper to make the first metal tools and weapons, which meant that they were kind of stronger than people that were still using stone. So if they did have to fight somebody that was using stone weapons, then they were going to win because the metal was stronger. It also helped them build better tools. No, cuneiform is the next thing. It's kind of out of order on your notes. All right, well, we're clearly going to have to do this. All right, so something also really, really important, which is the reason we're doing what we're doing right now, is that they created the world's first system of writing, which was called cuneiform. Everybody say cuneiform. Oh, don't be scared. Cuneiform. Cuneiform. Right. So cuneiform or cuneiform is the first system of writing. And they were the first people to write a lot of things down, books, laws, things like that. And that's why we have anything today that we read, that we watch on TV, that we look at on the internet, is all because people learned to write things down. And without TV, without writing, you wouldn't have TV or movies because those have to be written in a script. You wouldn't be able to write code for apps. Like everything that we kind of have now that's not spoken is due to them creating the first writing system. They also really importantly built irrigation systems, which we talked about a little bit with prehistory. Irrigation is when you control where the water goes to help water things you need it to. So in the picture here, these are that's pictures of kind of canals that you can put water into, and then people use that to then water the fields where all the plants are growing. And so they built all these canals and ditches to control the flood water, and then they would keep the flood water, and then when it wasn't raining enough, they would use that to water the crops. Yep, very smart. Michael, yes, is the answer to your question. All right, do I have any questions about this achievement slide?
Wait, so they did the sail?
Logan, do you still need to write down everything on this slide? No? Okay. Okay, all right. And for anybody that misses anything while we're talking, this will be posted on Google Classroom, so you can always go back and fill in things. All right, so let's talk about politics a little bit. So in the beginning, all of the power in Mesopotamia, its earliest governments were controlled by the temple priests. So the people that were kind of in charge of running religious stuff. So in the beginning in Mesopotamia, politics was controlled by the priests. We already talked about the fact that farmers believed the gods could be angry, and they needed to kind of get the gods and the priests' blessings so their crops would grow. And they believed that the only person that could really ask for this blessing and say the prayers and give the sacrifices to the gods were the priests. So the priests were kind of the middleman, the kind of go between the average people and the gods. Now for this service, conveniently, the priests required people to pay them for this service. So the people had to give them, the farmers had to give them part of their crops as a tax for them kind of talking to the priests and asking for the blessings and making the sacrifices for them, which gave them things to give to the gods, but also it gave the priests things to take home and eat since they weren't spending their time farming. Mm-hmm. Which came from Mesopotamia. Yes, it is. An eye for an eye. Like whatever you do to somebody is what the punishment is what happens to you. It comes from Hammurabi's code, which we'll talk about in a little bit. All right, so then things are going to change, right? And when we get to politics in Mesopotamia, it is a hot mess, right? It's very dramatic, lots of war, lots of fighting, lots of different kings. So basically in the beginning, the power was all with the priests, and then it changed over time to these, to what we call hereditary rulers. If something's hereditary, where do you get it from? Like if brown hair is hereditary in your family. Your genes, it's passed down from your family. So later, the power is going to shift away from the priest and it's going to go to these hereditary rulers, which are basically kings that took over places. And then when they died, their son became king and his son became king. And it would, or if they didn't have a son, their next male relative, their brother. And it would continue passing down through that same family until a stronger king with a better army came in, took over everybody, and then it got passed down through their family. This is important to know though, because this is kind of our first government where we have a king in place or we have somebody in power that then shifts it down to members of their family. But there's going to be a lot of wars. So we're going to have like this group of people has a king and they're in charge. And then eventually a bigger, stronger army is going to come in, kill them, take over. And it's just going to keep going and going and going because the land is so fertile and everybody wants it. 300. Yeah, that's in ancient Greece, but same war concept. Well, because in that time, gender had shifted because after hunting and gathering, the men were mostly the people that were doing the farming and hunting. So they began to become more important in society. And people started to be treated not equally, which is the answer to your question. All right, now I'm gonna keep this slide up on the screen for a minute. I want you to go ahead and work on your notes, and then I'm gonna explain something to you. So go ahead and fill in the blanks on that section. Okay, so when we talk about politics and government in Mesopotamia, the word you're probably looking for is drama, right? So as we've talked about, the fertile land was extremely valuable because then wealth and power came from owning land and being able to grow crops. So this piece of valuable land was constantly being fought over. There's tons and tons of war, tons and tons of transition of power, meaning this king's family is in charge. Oh, no, wait, now it's this one. No, wait, this one takes over. And it keeps changing. We've got the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians. The Assyrians come back again. You've got a ton of different people in charge. And here's what I want to show you. So this diagram here, if you click on it, it will go to the big version. Every green circle that you see is a different group of people that control this area of land. Which means there would have been a war for those people to take over. So if you're looking here, and the rest is kind of some of their achievements, but what I want you to really focus on is all of these green circles are a different group in charge of the land. So this is going to be a lot of fighting and a lot of war, which is really, there's a lot of transition. Things are constantly changing there. You don't really have a long period where everything's really the same.
Mute yourself.
All right, so with that in mind, I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to drag your dot to answer this question. Right? Would it be more accurate, so which is the better description, to describe the government or politics in Mesopotamia as stable or unstable? So we have politics, kings, power that is constantly changing to different people. So would we describe that as a stable government or an unstable government? Even though I like to have conversations like that, this particular week, I'm gonna say we're not gonna talk about politics in the US this week. Okay. We got things to do. Sure. That's such a long conversation. I have so many opinions on. However, I'm not going to have that conversation right now because we could not, I can give you information, not my own opinion, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's see what you guys had to say. Get out of my way, Zoom bar. Okay. All right, we had a few people cheating, okay? Here's the thing, so unstable is the correct answer. So if you think of like, if somebody said to you, if you're about to climb a ladder and somebody said, climb that, that's a very stable ladder. Or climb that one, that's a very unstable ladder. Which one do you want to go up?
The stable one.
The stable one, because that means it's stronger, it's in place, it's
one.
safer, it's more consistent. Unstable might mean a ladder that's going to fall apart when you climb on it, or it might fall over and break. So unstable is when it's constant, it's either it's not safe or there's constant change and transition. And that tends to make life more chaotic. People don't feel safe. People can't concentrate as much on other things because they're so busy worrying about war and the government changing and the leader changing and there being new laws and stuff like that. So the government in Mesopotamia was very unstable because a lot of people were fighting over it, but that probably also made it kind of weak so that people were able to keep attacking it because it was never able to get like really strong and be able to protect itself because it was under constant invasion. Yes. Yes. All right. Okay, so I'm actually going to go through the next two pretty quickly because I want to make sure that we finish today. All right. So their economy was mostly based on agriculture. We know that already. But some other things that are important is that they used metal tools and weapons. They were the first people to do this. They used bronze, which was stronger than the stone stuff that had been used. And then eventually they're going to learn how to use iron, which is stronger than bronze. But part of their economy was that they made metal tools and weapons, not just for their army, but to trade. So they were able to trade other people for things that they wanted by giving them those metal tools and weapons. Because the land was so fertile and they made so many good inventions related to farming and agriculture, they had this kind of constant increasing surplus of crops and food, which meant that they could also trade that stuff for other stuff that they needed. And they had that surplus because they invented better tools, plows, they invented irrigation. And that surplus of food was really important because people could spend time doing other stuff and inventing other stuff. Trade was really important to them as well. They used the rivers a lot of the times to sail on and trade. They also used the seas that surrounded them. And we know for a fact that they traded with Egypt, right? So ancient Egypt, which we'll get to, that's our next unit, is going on, you know, a little bit at the same time. Not right at first, but then they kind of eventually both happen at the same time. They're trading with the Egyptians. The Mesopotamians developed the world's first cities, which are going to be where a lot of trade is happening. And because they had this surplus of food and this trade, you had specialization. Remember, we talked about division of labor, where everybody learns to do a different skill or starts to do a different job. So you had other things start to become invented. Questions about economy? Nope. Zoom questions about economy? You guys good?
Miss Garrett.
Everybody good with those notes?
Remember, she can't hear us.
All right, let's talk about social class, which is our final topic today. So we are going to go into social classes in a little bit more detail when we get to this part of the unit, but just kind of as a summary, some important things to know. At the top, the people in Mesopotamia with the most power and respect were the kings and the priests. Underneath them were the wealthy merchants. Merchants are people who do what? Do we know? Like merchandise, Isaac? Trade. Merchants are the people that are trading things. They're the people you buy stuff from and the people you sell stuff to. Yeah, wealthy merchants. So people, so we can see here that people that have a lot of stuff or land or money eventually when it's invented here are going to have more power, more respect. Yes, sir. How? What?
Lots of
Games, yeah. And then we kind of have, and we'll get into it more specifically, the kind of all the other people are sort of broken into smaller groups, but you have the other people kind of underneath the kings and priests and wealthy merchants. And then at the bottom of Mesopotamian society, you have a group of people who were slaves. So slavery is something that has happened since the beginning of civilization with humans. It's probably, in my opinion, the worst part of human nature. Mesopotamian slaves were not slaves for life, though. They were often prisoners of war. Like when this new group came in and took over, they would enslave the people that they defeated, but then they could like earn their freedom. It sometimes was also people who couldn't pay their debts. If they owed people stuff and they couldn't pay it, they would have to become a slave for a certain amount of time to kind of pay that debt off. But then it wasn't necessarily, it wasn't for life. Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. If you are doing the notes on Google Classroom and you're finished, I want you to go and turn that in, right?